interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
I mean, it was pretty unexpected, the whole Kings thing. Because the song had already been out for like 2 years, and it was it's just a song on our record, and then one of the broadcast station wanted to use the song for an ad for the Kings, and then the team picked it up. I don't really know how that happened, but they picked it up and started using it as their win song. Like when they'd win a game, they'd play the song. And we had kind of heard through the grapevine that was happening. We're like, oh, that's cool. And then the team representative hit me up, and I said they wanted to have a meeting about involving us in the postseason. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And then so we had a meeting, and they were like, we wanted to see how we could get you guys to play the song in the stadium during the playoff games. Because at that point, I think it was 2010. So like the Kings hadn't been making it to the playoffs for a while. They weren't doing so hot. And this was like the first time back in playoffs, and they were doing great. So anyway, we figured out logistically how we were going to make it work, and we performed that year they didn't make it past the first round, so we only did I think it was 3 games that first year. But I mean, it was exhilarating. It was amazing. And at that point, I was, it's funny to say now because my son's a hockey player, so I'm engrossed in hockey now. But at the time, I had nothing to do with hockey at all, really. I had, I think I may have gone to a game or two in my youth, but not really. Anyways, but it was just rad. I mean, it was one of the coolest sports experiences, because I've never really been a very sporty guy anyway. So, but that was just like, whoa, this is really fun to watch, and this is really amazing. And so then then I became a really big fan, and because of our relationship with the team and stuff like that, would be able to go to games whenever I wanted to. So I ended up going to a ton of games the next year, and pretty much just following the whole season. And then playoffs came around again, and they asked us to do it again. So we did it 2 years in a row. And it was really, really incredible experience. And it's just funny. It is funny for me to look back at it then, because I really had no clue about. I was so not involved. Where now it's like my son plays on a travel team, so we are going to tournaments all around the country and stuff like that. So it's so much a part of my life now, but it wasn't at all at the time.
Yeah. My brother, his nephew. But my brother's nephew had played hockey, travel league like that. And they'll go from, like you're saying, state to state and big city. And it's funny, he'll wear something like a Slapshot shirt, that he had from high school. And I'm talking about the Boston hardcore band for people listening. I know, but and it's like, it's inevitable when he does that. People see it and they're always like, freaking out, or they'll pull him aside and be like, hey, is that who I think it is? And then these 2 grown men with kids sit there and go back and forth, about hardcore music and just how much it meant to them. So for everybody listening, so they understand who you are and what you're talking about with the LA Kings. But when you were with the Briggs, you guys had a song called This Is LA, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens with all great music is that eventually things catch on. And I can remember first getting into the Briggs and just telling people like, hey, you got to check this out. And it's one of those things where when people heard it, they were like, oh, I didn't I didn't know that's what kind of music you were talking about. Whenever I hear you say punk or hardcore, I always think of like just someone screaming and yelling, with no talent. And so it's weird that it's kind of had to get over that hump for, decades until now. You've got, coliseums like that where people want to hear this song and then kind of rally behind it, where I don't know, I would imagine maybe when you were a teenager, would you have ever thought that when you got into, music and punk, that eventually one day that would be that would be occurring?
No, not at all. I mean, it's funny too, because a lot of times the most common question I get about that particular thing, that particular relationship, is people are always asking me like, "Oh, how did you guys write a song for the Kings?" And like they assume that it's the opposite. Like, they like, I was like, "Hey, guys, I got a song for you. This is your theme song. What do you think?" But it was quite the opposite. It was just like, we had a song that was already out, and we were already just playing it. And then, somebody in that camp was like, "Oh, this is perfect. This fits really well," and started using it, and yeah, it never crossed my mind that it would be that's what it would be used for. And, it's really fun. I mean, they use it at the Galaxy games as well for the soccer. And so that's, it's always fun when I'm at a game and I just hear the song. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So for everybody listening, I'm talking to Joey LaRocca from the Briggs and now the Defiant. Anybody who's following me on Instagram or has heard previous episodes, I've mentioned both these bands before. I always love getting guests on that come from a musical background and who have also kind of led a really good life, in the sense that they're just good to people and make time for them and that sort of thing. So I do appreciate you jumping on. I want to get right back into the Briggs at the time. And you all, I don't know, you tell me, but like some of the larger exposure that y'all got seemed to be when y'all were on the Vans tour. And I caught you guys in Charlotte, North Carolina one year.
Yeah.
And drove a couple hours, and it was an incredible show. It was like the Briggs, Street Dogs, Agrolites, and I think the Agrolites had Angela Moore at the time from Fishbone touring with them,
Right.
and then Against Me and a lot of other bands.
Yeah. Warped Tour was definitely a big part of our career, for sure. It's funny. Some people either didn't really, they may have played it once or twice, but never really kind of got into it. Like, we really got into the culture of it and really enjoyed being on the tour. And we did it 4 times over the years. And I had done it actually solo a couple of times after that as well. So yeah, it was always, it was a total insane circus. And it's really, there hasn't been anything like that since. And I don't think there was really anything before it existed that was quite the same. I mean, it was a really unique experience to have for the bands and for the fans, because it was like what I loved about Warped, and it was always something that Kevin Lyman, the creator of it, his sort of mission was always to expose people to new bands. That was his kind of idea, was like, not just like come to a show and see the bands you like. It's like, no, you're going to end up finding your new favorite band, kind of thing. So with that being said, it wasn't the structure of it wasn't like how normal festivals go, where you get the small bands and then the big bands as the day goes on. They mix match it. Every day is different. Schedule doesn't get released until that morning, so that way you're kind of forced to show up on time. You're forced to go be exposed to other bands because you don't want to miss your favorite band. So anyways, it was just cool. We definitely enjoyed being a part of that. And that was, obviously that was a huge part for us too, being exposed to new fans. We got a lot of fans from doing work that probably would have never otherwise, paid attention to our style, because there was, again, so many different styles too, so people just kind of got exposed to different styles of things that they like too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know about the lineup thing. So like
Mhm.
my buddy and I got there. I mean, I think it was like 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And there's just, people everywhere, bands are already playing. And I think you all had just started, and all of a sudden, like everybody stops. There was a pit going, and a young kid, I think was like 16 or 17, broke his arm and left. And then they got word back to you all that the kid was okay. It was the first show he had ever been to.
That's
First time
right.
he
I
got
didn't
in the
remember
pit.
that.
Yeah. And broke his arm. And my buddy and I are talking, and we're just like, I hate that kid got hurt. But also, it was almost like this, like everybody's kind of cheering, like, like that kid's never going to forget it. And here I am, however many years later, telling the story. But yeah.
That's funny. If I remember correctly, because I do remember that now that you mentioned it,
Yeah.
it was gone. But now that you say it, I actually do remember that. And if I remember correctly, that kid went to the hospital, had to get a cast and all that kind of stuff, and came back for the rest
Yes.
of the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
Those are the things like that. I don't know. Just to me, like my first show, I was 13, and it was just one of those things that I loved it, fell in love with it. First stage dive was Leeway and Bad Brains,
No, nice.
and I got to talk to Eddie, Leeway's lead singer, years later, and he and I just connected through Instagram, and just got to talking. And then he had a podcast for a little while, and I jumped on as a guest way back before I was even doing the show. But it was cool to be able to talk to him and let him know that show, and it wasn't my first show, but that was the first time I was like stage diving and really feeling comfortable at a place. And it was Bad Brains. So I mean, I was like, it was incredible.
Yeah, that's pretty huge.
But one of those things, like, so for you, what was it like when you were first getting into, this whole category of punk, hardcore, whatever people want to call it, street rock and roll, like all of that, you know what I mean? Just how was it like when you first got into it? How'd you find it?
I was definitely exposed to it mainly through skating. So I was a skater when I was a teenager. So all the music, all the skate videos. They used to have VHS skate videos and stuff like that. And there was always the soundtrack of those were amazing. And there was always that's how the first time I heard Operation Ivy was through one of those tapes. And I didn't even know what the band was, but I was like, I was watching these tapes or whatever, and then a friend of mine had gone like, oh, you got to check out this band. I was like, oh yeah, I've heard that before, So anyways, that was sort of the introduction. It kind of went hand in hand in the 90s was, punk and skating. And then actually one of the first punk shows I went to was Warped Tour. I actually went to Warped Tour in 98. And it was Rancid and Bad Religion and Boss Tones, or was Boss Tones? Maybe, I don't remember. But anyways, ton of bands, and I remember being so like, what the hell is going on? There was so much happening, and there was just all these stages everywhere. And then they had, at the time back then, they had motocross dudes on the tour, and they were literally like, launching over the stage. You just see, you're watching a band, and some dude's just like doing a flip on a bike, flying 50 feet in the air. It was just insane. It was a complete, and it was like, 102 degrees. It was brutal, but it was really fun. And that was probably one of my first shows in that arena.
Did you always like instruments, music, playing anything, singing?
Yeah, I mean, I got it. So the Briggs was comprised of my brother and I. We started the band together. So him and I did bands together since we were like 11 and 13. So like we started, or that's when we started learning how to play our instruments. And then, but shortly after that, like we started playing in clubs in LA, like by the time I was 14. And we had different bands. We'd start with friends or whatever. And then it probably was like the 5th or 6th band that we started that finally stuck and started to do something. But yeah, and so I was always into. My parents were big music fans. They weren't musicians, but they were super into music. My dad was at the original Woodstock, so he was like, you know, into music. They had a great record collection, so I was exposed to a lot of great classic rock music growing up. And my parents are from New York, so actually my very first concert was in New York. It was at Roseland with Violent Femmes were the first band I saw. That was great.
Okay.
It was an awesome show.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I had gone to a good handful of shows throughout my teens. And then once we started really doing, the band that became the Briggs actually was a band called I Decline before that. And then for some reasons, you know, based on the name being owned by somebody, blah, 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 we changed our name. But once we started doing that, then it was in LA was kind of exploding with punk. Punk was just such a big thing at the time, and there was just shows all the time. So we would play community centers and people's backyards and people's living rooms, you know, and shitty little clubs. I mean, we had made just a decision at one point. We're like, we're going to play every weekend we're going to play a show. It doesn't matter where it is, doesn't matter, you know, how many, we're just going to figure it out, and we're going to play every weekend. So we had a few months where we would play like Friday and Saturday, just wherever. We just call people up and try and jump on whatever we could. So it was a really fun time. And this was also, you know, pre-internet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the internet sort of existed, but it wasn't obviously anything that it is now. So it's just a very different world. And it was all about connecting with people, going out, going to shows, going to parties and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah. I was going to ask if that was that era of the fanzine, you know, or even,
yeah,
you know,
we had a few of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a few little local mags that then that was another thing that would always helped get a little boost in terms of people's exposure to you, or the little magazines that people would make, you know, the little fanzines and stuff like that. We had a few in locally that would do write-ups on us and stuff like that. And, you know, you start to develop relationships with these people, and they become fans and friends. And yeah, that's true. That was a fun aspect of that era too.
And I talk about it a lot with people, and sometimes people are like, oh, well, you know, the younger generation has it so easy with the internet or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but people have always used whatever methods possible to connect.
Yeah.
So back then it was, you know, and I was fortunate enough. There were older guys in our area that had started a zine, really good at photography. They would film shows. They would travel from where we were to Washington, D.C., film shows there. A lot of their footage was used later in documentaries and stuff now that, you know, in the last few years that came out of the D.C. scene or other bands playing. But these were like teenagers, you know, 18, 19-year-old guys.
Yeah.
Who started that. And then I got interested in that. And I was several years younger than them, and did a zine, and, you know, got to interview some bands. And it was one of those things that, for me, kind of empowered me to go, okay, if there's something I want to do, I'll just go do it, and we'll figure out how to do it. And it wasn't, and I mean, this sounds so cliche, but it was like, it wasn't about making money. It was having fun talking to bands and doing record reviews and things like that. And then corresponding with all these bands through handwritten letters, and bands replying with their handwritten letters like, hey, if we come through your city, you know, hook us up with this club or that club, or can we crash at your house? You know, if we play a show there and stuff. And man, I kept all that stuff and still have those letters. So every now and then, like if I'm messaging with someone and it came up just the other day, Rabies, lead singer of Warzone, and a guy was mentioning him. I'm like, man, I still have a handwritten letter from him from
That's right.
when I was a teenager. Like here
That's
I am,
right.
you know, yeah, like listening to these records, and you know, I don't know if people fully understand how important it was at that time and how committed people were to it. But we see it now with bands who are still touring 30, 40 years later,
Yeah.
still putting out records, and it's it has integrity and sincerity, and it's not about people just kind of rehashing the old. I don't know. I don't know how to better explain it other than to go to shows and see bands play with all this energy. And some bands, you know, I saw Agnostic Front recently, Murphy's Law. They're you know, what people are considered, oh, you're old and retired. And man, they've got more energy than anyone else. They get on stage and just and crush it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is really funny, you know, it's pretty remarkable. I definitely wouldn't have expected it that, you know, some of the bands that I toured with 15, 20 years ago are still the bands that we play with when we do festivals and shit. You know, it's just funny.
Yeah.
Like it's still the same crop of people. Like it's kind of hilarious. You know, we just played Punk and Drublic in Boston, and you know, we played with NoFX a handful of times, and they're, you know, obviously now they're finally saying farewell, but it's been a long haul.
Yeah.
And then Circle Jerks again, we played with them back in, you know, the early 2000s, and here they're still freaking going. I mean, it's pretty cool that, you know, that, and you're right. I do agree that there's an incredible energy with a lot of these dudes. These guys are great performers, and just, you know, and there is something, there is just such a veteran aspect to it. You just feel, it just feels so effortless, you know, but it's also incredibly well done, you know. And I feel like it's definitely, it is really unexpected. I would have never thought that these would be the same dudes that I'm still watching play, you know. But
Yeah.
it's pretty cool for sure.
I wouldn't have either. I mean, like I said, when I go back and look at old records, and I stop and go, yeah, that was probably about 10, maybe 15 years ago. And it's, we're talking about like people who are now like adults and they have kids, you know,
Yeah.
weren't even born when a lot of those original records came out. Or like
Yeah, I mean,
you mentioned
that,
Circle Jerks. Yeah.
yeah, and then also, you know, that's the same thing with the members of the Defiant. It's like when we were doing the math on it, in fact, the poster I have behind me, this one here is the Street Dogs Briggs tour we did in 2003. Like that's how long I've known Johnny. I've known Johnny since, you know, we were in I was in my early 20s. And yeah, so it's pretty nuts. And same with Dickie. I met Dickie, I think, that same year, because the Briggs played with the Boss Tones in Detroit. So anyways, it's funny to be like, wow, we've known each other for over 20 years. That's pretty insane. And now all of a sudden we're, you know, joining a band together, which is pretty hilarious. But
so let me say this. So you're talking about the Defiant, and I love all those bands separately. Like when you mentioned Street Dogs and how long they had been around, and the Briggs, and you guys would tour with them and catch these shows with other bands like Flatfoot 56 and stuff, and the Boss Tones. And so now it's like the Defiant is, I hate even saying like the All-Star League, but it's like this superhero group of just different bands that I love. And then y'all are putting out music, and because I have like a creative eye, I love art. I'm not that great at it, but I love what you all do with the art, the logo, the merchandise. I know some people were like, oh, it's all about the music. It is, but for me, I love the music. I love the energy of the shows. I love when bands interact with people and also know how to do art and
Yeah.
logos and merch. I mean, legit. I don't know. It's a great feeling for me to know that y'all exist and that y'all are playing shows. Hopefully, y'all will play some farther south because I can't travel all the way up to Boston. But I am glad to see that. And like when you're saying who would have been able to predict, 20 years down the road, bands are still playing. I think that for me, I knew around like when you mentioned 03, 04, you all were part of like a resurgence for me. Because when I first got into punk, it was like 86, 87.
Mm-hmm.
I was just a little kid. And it was all, your band's coming out of California. Revelation Records is just starting to take off by like 88, 89. So it's like all these different sounds that we were getting in the city that I was in the South, which is kind of cool. It wasn't just isolated to one scene. But I saw it kind of drift off in the 90s, and
Yeah.
and it kind of it broke my heart, man. I did 4 years in the Army, and I always tell this. I used to get smoked. I'd get punished. I had to do push-ups and all these crazy exercises because when mail call would come, the sergeants, the NCOs, would throw the letters out, and they would be like, "What is this communist shit?" And they would throw it, and it would be like a letter from Black Train Jack or something, you know what I mean, or like Snapcase or something. And so in my mind, it was like that this scene was starting to kind of die out. One, because I was so isolated, being in the Army, but also seeing some of those bands break up and the other bands not putting anything out.
Yeah.
And then come about, man, like you said, like 03, 04, 05, you guys all start to, form these bands. These bands are starting to tour. And it blew me away when I saw the Briggs live back then and Street Dogs, like I said, Flatfoot 56 and stuff. It was like, okay, now we're back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like now the scene is back together, and even a younger generation of teenagers are coming to these shows and seeing that, hey, there's so much like positive energy in the shows, in the bands talking, and like for me in our neighborhood, my brother and I took these teenagers to a show, like when we were around that time. And this kid, it was his 16th birthday, and we took him to an H2O show, and it was around that time.
Nice.
And I mean, he loved the band. We turned him on to like Bouncing Souls and the Briggs and stuff. But I had written a message to get back to Toby to be able to, give our buddy a happy, birthday wish before they played a song. And so Toby does it, when H2O is on stage. And that kid back then is now an adult with two other kids, and we still talk about that. And our friends, still talk about like how good it felt to us to be able to show them this is why we love this music.
Yeah.
It's so I hate saying like organic, but I mean, it really is like, it's like everybody kind of knows one another, even though you've never met,
Yeah.
And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we, that was one of the real parts that I loved about it too. When I first started getting into going to shows and stuff like that, and I had friends in different bands, and we would, I had interacted with a few different people back then when I was just in my like late teens. I had met Tim Armstrong and had met a few other, I don't know who else, but yeah, Lars and whatever. And I was like, and I remember how cool they were, like, and just so easy to talk to, and just, and then like, even it would like remember my name when I saw them again, you know what I mean? And that was like, oh wow, this is really cool. And it was like, I felt like I was like, oh, you get this concept of musicians kind of being whatever about, like they're kind of above you or whatever, but it was so not that way in this particular scene. And I was like, whoa, this is cool. Like everyone's just chill and everyone's really easy to get along with. So yeah, that was definitely something that was a big plus for me getting into it, was to just see how cool people were, and that no one was really like out of reach, you know. And like you said, it's like it was so easy to talk, you know, to we don't, so many people that are maybe into, you know, if they are into Justin Bieber or something like that, they're not going to be able to reach the
Yeah.
dude to say, you know, hey. But you know, when you're the good thing about this is that, you know, these are just regular people that probably have just regular jobs too. So if you reach out and say, hey, love your band, probably going to say thanks, you know, you know, just have a conversation. So yeah, it is really, it is a super cool aspect of it, is that how reachable everyone is, and how everyone kind of knows each other and learns each other.
Yeah. So now you've got the Defiant going on now, and y'all just played up in Boston, you were mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing the same thing kind of like across the board, where everybody's kind of getting back in to the kind of the groove of going to shows, and festivals are now being scheduled and stuff, where a couple of years ago, you know, we went into a hiatus in society, and I can remember talking to musicians and they were just like I have to play again. I can't stand staying at home. Like I just want to play shows. And I think that like history will look back and fully understand, hopefully, the effects psychologically just on people who have artist temperament and they can't do what they love.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I mentioned earlier, I love art and I love music. I can't sing and I don't, you know, create art for a living. But I could not imagine doing what I love and then not being able to perform. And it's one of those things where I'm just glad that now venues are starting to get packed again, and bands are just, you know, able to play. And it seems like, again, we're seeing another resurgence where bands are going on tour and they're just bringing back all that great music, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I did, you know, I started to see it, a few years ago. I started to really see a resurgence of this scene for a multitude of reasons. You know, you've got all of us are old and have kids of our own, so we're introducing them to music, just like my parents introduced me to their bands, you know. And then also though, there's another generation of kids that we didn't have 10 years ago, which is teenagers and kids in like their early 20s and stuff, that are playing instruments again. Like they want to learn how to play guitar. They want to learn how to play drums. You know, 10 years ago, it was all about DJing. Everything was about electronic music. And all kids wanted to do was learn how to program. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that was where their interest was. And their interest was not in picking up a guitar. You know, a lot of people, I remember there was a very common thing in the industry saying that guitar music was dead. Like music that has guitars in it, don't, you know, synths and all that, and electronic drums, perfect. But guitars, dead. And then, you know, I started to see teenagers, when I started to see like, hey, my kid's band is playing, and then I'm seeing you know, these 13, 14-year-old kids playing in a punk band, and I'm like, what? Whoa, where is this coming from, you know?
Yeah.
And so once you start to see that, you're like, okay, cool, that means that we're back, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's once that generation is like, yeah, dude, I want to rip, you know, riffs, you know.
Yeah.
Then we go, awesome, cool, because, you know, also to be, you know, to be honest too, it's like, as much as I love NoFX and Bad Religion and Rancid, we need a new crop of bands.
Mhm.
We need the new bands to be those. We need the new Rancid. We need in terms of this generation of kids has to have their bands that speak to them.
Yeah.
And so I'm really ready for that. There's definitely some, but it's not quite there. You still do see the domination of festival bills are still legacy bands. Again,
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. Like people want to go see the bands that they grew up listening to. Totally get it. But I would love to see more of those festivals being packed with bands that people are excited to see for the first time, that they've been hearing, and have listened to and gone, oh, dude, I can't, and I've been seeing some of that, like Turnstile is a good
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah.
And like Idols is a super rad
Mhm.
band from the UK that still a lot of people my age are super excited about. But still, it's cool to see a newer band, a band that's been around for maybe the last 5, 6, 7 years, and is getting up there in terms of the ranking on festival bills because that many people want to go see them. Anyways, I talk a lot about that because
Mhm.
it's, for me, it's like, what was so cool about the music when we were young was that the people making the music was just a little bit older than us. It wasn't like we were
Yeah.
watching a bunch of older dudes. It was like, they were just, a little older, a little wiser than we were, which is what we gravitated towards. So I just want to see that for this generation, that their bands are the ones that kind of take over the scene.
Yeah, there's a band, and I want to say out of Florida, and if I'm wrong, I apologize. Billy Bats and the Made Men, and I feel like they're late teenagers, early 20s.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but a dude sent me a link, maybe like a year and a half ago, and I was like, oh, okay, because they're so young, or I say young. I mean, I think they're pretty young, but they just have like that stripped down original like punk sound,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't, to me at least, it doesn't come across as um young people trying to just replicate something.
Sure.
It's almost like if they were in a time warp and they were going to shows, but their sound is a lot like that. And what I assume will probably happen is a little bit as they get older, or the more music they make, they'll find that newer sound that we don't really know, and
Yeah,
I
totally.
think I think one of their newer members or fill-ins, and I'm probably getting it wrong, but there's a band called Orphan Riot, and they were, when they first started, were like high schoolers, and it was the same thing. It was just a couple of years ago, but it was cool to see them. I saw them at a small venue, but it was cool to see like these young teenagers making music, and it seems sincere to me anyway. It's not like some kind of gimmick or someone came up and told them, hey, Rancid and Bad Religion and Green Day and all these bands are like huge. Play this punk. It seemed very sincere to me. So,
Yeah.
and you had mentioned Turnstile. Man, when I heard them several years ago, and it was before like the Glow album came out. And so I was, like you do, you share music with people. And so some people are like, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. And then the Glow album came out, and for a lot of people, then to them it was a different sound.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother and a bunch of my cousins and stuff, man, we would just sit around at the beach and listen to it like just on constant repeat, and feel so good, like yeah, like there's this kind of new scene that's emerging, or these new bands that are emerging. um and I think they're a great example of that, and I mentioned them before. And there's almost like this running joke where people are like, why are you always trying to push turnstiles?
Yeah.
Like, like you're a dealer or something. Like, no, I just, if there's a great band out there, go check them out. Like,
Yeah.
don't keep it to yourself. Like,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And then also, I mean, it's nice too. I mean, I like the idea too, where I for me, I was into a lot of older stuff too. So like there was only, because like when I at one point I was just like, I dug really into into punk when I was like 19 or so. I got super into the UK, scene of Clash and Sham 69 and Specials and everything, and that had existed, in the late 70s and stuff like that. But the only problem is that whatever the catalog is the catalog. You know what I mean? Like you're not getting anything new out of it.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the same. There are some of us are still putting out records, but there is the point of what I'm trying to make is that it's fun as a scene and as a music listener to get excited, like they have a new record coming out, and you get to hear fresh songs from that band that you really like, and then another year goes by and you get another crop of new songs from that band. So that's something that is an important aspect of it too, to really be able to have that relationship with the music, that you're excited to hear the new thing that they put out, and you're anticipating, you're like, I'm sick of this record. I've listened to it 100 times. I'm ready for some new songs from them,
Yeah. Yeah. So when you said earlier about skating, how did you get into skating? I think you said, what was that, like in the 90s, right? That kind of
era? I mean, and to be perfectly fair, I was never very good at it, and it was never something I was.
It's an art. It's an art, not a sport.
Ever pursued. But it was just that was just what we all did. I mean, it's like we didn't have phones and stuff, so it was just like you go outside and you do something. Some people played basketball, some people were into whatever, but most kids my age and that were kind of into similar stuff, that was sort of just what we did as our group function, was to go out and find a flight of stairs or something, somewhere that we're going to get kicked out of in the next hour. But that was just it was such a, I think it was just a cultural thing too, in LA during the 90s. It was like we skated, that's what we did,
Yeah.
But I was never, the thing with me, why I was never very good at it is I never wanted to take chances. Like my brother was fearless. He would just jump off of anything. And so he got really good because he knew how to fall and he knew how to not break things.
Just roll.
I was just always afraid I was going to hurt myself. And I was too dainty with it. I never was willing to really take any big chances.
So like when you mentioned that, there's a picture here when I was a kid, and there's a sign there that says no skateboarding or bicycles allowed.
Nice.
My brother, being who he was at the time, hit the sign with his skateboard, broke it, and then took it to this cul-de-sac where we lived. Nice. And I took this picture because I was the youngest, so I always had to like take pictures of everything we did. But we, like you had mentioned, getting kicked out of places, and like back then that slogan was skateboarding is not a crime.
Yeah.
And that was like our way of sort of rebelling. And in these ramps, we built by hand from wood that we acquired at different construction sites and stuff. None of us knew. I mean, none of us could, in this picture was taken, no one could drive. My brother and his buddies are 15 years old. So it's kind of crazy. But that idea of like for us rebelling like that and running from the police and taking our skateboards, we're skating downtown a very large city in the South, and you just take off running when you see the police because you know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And you run around the corner of a building until they can't see you, and you just throw your skateboard in the closest trash can or wherever you can. And then you walk right through the crowd, and all they're looking for is, the 4 or 5 kids that took off running skateboards.
Yeah.
And then you just double back, pull your board out of the trash can.
I know, it's funny. I try not to sound like an old man, like a grumpy old man about it. But like in my neighborhood, almost every park has a skate park in it, and it's always just like, I'm like, we didn't have that. Like, what the fuck, like it was so not fair that this generation has like all these parks that allow it. You've got full blown skate parks in just about every public park in LA. Whereas like we were just constantly getting kicked out of places. But with that said, also, I think that like, obviously that's sort of part of the fun of it. And that was sort of the culture of it, was that you were kind of doing something that was like kind of naughty. It was kind of like, well, you're not really supposed to do this. You're not really supposed to, and then you wait for the bank teller to come outside and tell you can't do it here, and you're like, and you gripe with the guy and you give him a hard time. It was like, that was part of the whole, thing, the whole culture of it too. So it's not all bad that's like, oh, not fair. Cause it's like, to our benefit, it was kind of the whole experience of that, whereas if it was all just allowed and you were just allowed to do it wherever you wanted, it kind of takes a little bit of the fun out of it.
No, it definitely, and for all of us, it was funny how we were all kind of friends just because of where we grew up, but we all got into skating and everybody loved it, and like you said, like everybody always says like, oh, but I wasn't that good, and it doesn't matter. Like I still look back and think those are like some of the best years of my life. Yeah. Because the skating kind of, it was that cycle of skating and music. We're all one. And like you were talking about, skate videos that you could watch, back then Thrasher would put out like, all those different, like, I think it's called Flip Side or something like that. But, you would see these videos and hear this music, and it's hard to kind of capture that and carry it on and tell people about how just insane it was that people hated skating so bad. Yeah. And growing up in the South, people will clown me about my accent and being from the South, and then I start talking about music and skating, and no one really understood that all these cities down here had these core groups of like skaters and bands touring through here. And it legit was Camaros chasing us and like pickup trucks and these rednecks, like that was legit stuff. And I won't get into story time with that. But with that being said, all the skate parks and things that are going on now, I do wonder if kids that are growing up in that skate scene now, if it feels the same in that sense of like such a strong bond. Like if a kid sees another kid skating in another town, maybe they're going to go visit a relative or something, do they strike up a conversation with that kid who's skating because they feel like they're all kind of part of the same group, or do they just think, everybody skates,
that's a good question. I don't, it's hard to know from my perspective, because I don't really have any like kids that are into it or anything, but I don't know if it's the same subculture for sure. Like that was definitely like a real subculture that existed, and I don't know that it's quite that strong as it was, but who knows? I mean, funny enough, one thing I will say that about the difference of this generation versus this versus our generation of it was, we were never like friends with the BMXers or the other kinds, you know what I mean? Where now it's like they all do stuff together. They're all at the park together. So you got the BMXers, you got scooter kids doing tricks on scooters and stuff. And I just and that always just that one cracks me up, because I'm just like, oh man, like you would have just gotten heckled to hell for being on a scooter, even though the stuff they're doing is impressive and it's cool. But I just like go, wow, this is a different generation, because there
really was beef between like BMXers and skaters back then, and I don't even know why that was. You would think we would all want to join forces because we were constantly outnumbered, but there was we were not going to hang out with BMXers or whatever they were called.
Yeah, I don't know what that was.
But
it's just a team mentality, I guess. It's like, This is
Yeah,
our
and
crew, that's your thing.
yeah, and I think that still obviously goes on with teenagers now,
Yeah.
but back then, like one of the things too that at least where I was, a lot of families, were people would say dissolving or were dysfunctional or whatever you want to say, but
Yeah.
my parents split up when I was like 6,
Mhm.
and I'm glad only because I didn't have to live in a home where two people don't want to
Yeah.
they don't want to come home and be together. So I noticed as an adult looking back, all of us from that scene, all the kids that were skating, going to see bands play, all of us had parents that were divorced.
Mhm.
And it was weird because I had other friends whose parents were still married, and I don't know if maybe at that time that's why they didn't kind of gravitate to skating or to this like rebellious type subculture, because
Right.
they were everything was kind of cool maybe in their home. I don't know, but it
Well,
was definitely
that's an interesting perspective. I mean, honestly, if to be in all reality, I just think that like it was parenting just in general was so different then. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's like I always think about that, like the difference between what my parents would do in terms of like we walk out the door and then we're gone for hours. We don't have phones. We don't have any way of being
Yeah.
reached, but then we just show back up at some point. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I was just like, I wouldn't be able to, breathe not knowing where my kids were for hours on end. Like it would just be, so it's just there is a little bit of just a different culture in that respect too, because like, and it wasn't thought of as weird, and it wasn't, and I think they were just used to that. They're like, yeah, see you later, and you're out the
Yeah.
door, and be back when dinner's ready or whatever. And so that's what we did is you find your group, you'd find what you were into, and then you just, and you think about all the things that your parents never knew about, that
Yeah.
falling, even just things that were just, I know different times, falling off of shit or practically almost dying because of some stupid thing I did. You know what I mean? I never would tell my parents about, but it's just
Yeah.
things like that too. It's just, I don't think my kids will have those same experiences. I was like,
Right, right.
not that I'm a total helicopter parent, but I mean, I definitely have
Yeah.
a lot more pulse on what they're doing than my parents did.
I tell stories all the time about growing up and what my mom was like. She's this single mother and raising 2 boys, and she was um the type that knew we were good kids. Like
Mhm.
even though like my brother, damaged that sign or whatever, for the most part, we weren't going out and trying to get into fights, and
Sure.
we definitely weren't stealing things from people. We just
Yeah.
we would try to leave everybody alone, but we also wanted to have our fun.
Yeah.
But I came home. I don't know, sometime when I was around 15 or 16 or somewhere around there, and the Boss Tones were playing early on, and I came home and my mom was still sitting up. Now, and she's passed away, but she wasn't an alcoholic or anything. She just enjoyed beer and
Mhm.
smoking cigarettes, like, and talking. So when I get home, she's like sitting in our kitchen, smoking a cigarette and drinking Old Milwaukee. And she looks, she's basically like asking me, how was the show? And then she looks at my ankle, and I had like white socks on, but one of my socks was completely red, and it was somebody's blood. Unfortunately, when I was stage diving, I probably either kicked somebody or somebody landed on my foot, maybe in the pit or something, and bled all over. It wasn't my blood, but her thing was just like kind of like just shaking her head, like, what the hell's wrong with y'all? But also knowing we were good kids, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, it's just kind of that thing. Like, so
Yeah.
she gets a phone call one day, and the landlord is mad because my brother had a band with a buddy of his, and they decided to play our living room on a teacher work day. And so like all these kids back then, my brother and then were putting out flyers all over the city. So everybody's just catching cabs to our house. We live in a very small neighborhood, and the landlord owned all these small rental homes. And my brother, at whatever age, 15 or something, 16, he's like, hey, we're just going to play the living room, man. Everybody's going to come over. And that now she wasn't too happy because the landlord called, was like, he shut it down. Like, I'll call the police. Y'all got to get out of here. But, as we grew up, she thought stuff like that was funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, just a very cool perspective of, well, y'all are good kids though. You know what I mean? Like, so what if you listen to crazy music? And when my brother wanted a mohawk, she cut his mohawk for him. Like, she didn't care. It's like, whatever, go. Yeah. But you're good kids. So I always look at that and think, what a cool parenting job she did. And for my brother and I to still get together and tell stories. And fortunately, we've still got a few pictures, and stuff like that. But just this idea of adults and parents, taking care of their kids, but also let your kid be what they are. You know what I mean? Like,
I had a very similar relationship with my parents growing up during that period of time where, they were like, kind of like, they kind of frown about like the hair or the, this or the clothes. And just like, but they same thing. It was like, I was a good kid. I didn't really get into too much trouble. So they kind of give me a pass. They really hated when I started getting tattoos. And that was a big thing. My mom would be like, okay, it's fine, but just no more, and I was like, but I remember, at some point where they stopped caring, like, and it was not just like, I give up but they just were like, at one point it kind of changed to like, oh, what did you just get? And then they were curious about the new tattoo I would get or whatever, and then come full circle. My dad passed away about 5 years ago, but a couple of years before he passed, he was like, we should go get tattooed together. And we actually went and got tattooed the same day, which that was a pretty, that's pretty hilarious. Cause again, like that was one thing they really hated. My parents really came down on me about the tattoos. They're just like, why are you doing that to your body and this and that? And so then for him to come to me, approach me and go, hey, do you want to get tattooed together? I was like, that's pretty cool. So
no, is that that's good. I love hearing stories like that. Especially about, fathers that, anyway. So when y'all got that, was that I'm assuming that was his first tattoo?
It was his first and only tattoo. Yeah. So he got my daughter's name, actually. He got his granddaughter's name tattooed. And yeah, that was a cool experience. That was really fun.
Yeah. Now, do you think that for him, I mean, obviously he was able to see you start a band, you and your brother start a band, and what it becomes, with the Briggs, and to be able to play these shows. Was he able to see a lot of the fans or supporters of the Briggs? Like, could he see it kind of in real time? Like, wow, like you're having an effect on other people's lives in a very positive way.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember my parents have always been really, really supportive of my brother and I doing music, and they always loved coming to shows. They came to almost every show when we were younger, and anytime we would play LA, obviously they'd want to come. And I remember it actually kind of like annoying me. Like, why do you want to, like, you've seen us play about a million times. And it's funny because, like I said earlier, my son plays hockey, and I love watching him play. Like, I absolutely love it. And so I don't want to miss a game. Like, anytime I can go to a game, I'm there. You know what I mean? So it is funny because I remember being like, I didn't get it, and I was almost like annoyed at the fact that they wanted to come to every show, and why are they always coming to shows? And now I'm like, oh, I get it. Like they actually were like, this is cool. I like watching my sons do this cool thing, you know, and this is cool that they've developed this interest, and this is now what they're doing with it. So I get it now, but at the time I totally did not understand it.
So looking into the future and looking forward, a lot of listeners will go and actually, if they've never heard of the Briggs or the Defiant, they'll go, and because the internet is so wonderful, they'll go and listen to some of the music. What do you see moving forward for the Defiant, you know, and being able to tour, and kind of like what we mentioned earlier, are there some things you can talk about, you know, moving forward, like if y'all are playing shows, or you're able to talk about that or no?
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple of things coming up. We're doing Riot Fest, which is awesome. I've played Riot Fest before in other things, but it's rad to be doing that, and it's also a lot of some of the same people we just played with at Punk and Drublic, but a whole lot more. But Chicago and we played Chicago earlier this year too, with Me First and the Gimme Gimme. So stoked to go back there. And then we're finally, because you know, we're still sort of a baby band in certain ways. Obviously we're a bunch of old dudes, but we're still a new band. So, you know, we haven't actually really played any too many West Coast shows, you know. So we actually have we have a little West Coast run we're doing in December. Some of the shows are with Social Distortion, which is super rad.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, so that's kind of what's next on the horizon. And we're getting back into the writing process. You know, we're not jumping in the studio anytime soon, but we're starting to demo new songs and start to, you know, formulate a plan for the next set of music. But that's kind of where we're at right now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, could you go through and just kind of mention the band members and their backgrounds, like the bands they've been with? Because I kind of glazed over earlier, and I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, so, you know, obviously Dickie Barrett, you know, it's funny that it's funny to be in a band together with him now. I mean, my band opened up for the Boss Tones in, you know, that I think it was 2003. So it was like, you know, 21 years ago. And we had kind of crossed paths a few times. And in fact, at one point we lived really close to each other. And so we ran into each other once in a while at like the park and stuff with our kids. And then Johnny is the bass player, is from the Street Dogs. Again, I've known the guy for over 20 years and toured with him. Out of anyone in the band, he's the one I've toured with the most. The Street Dogs and the Briggs did a lot of tours together.
Yeah.
And we even shared a bus at one point. So we've actually traveled together before too. So Greg Camp was the original guitar player for Smash Mouth and wrote, you know, All Star and all the songs that everyone knows. And Greg and I became friends through our kids. Actually, our daughters became really good friends in preschool, and then he brought his daughter over for a play date, and then we hit it off, and we're like, oh, you're a band guy, I'm a band guy. And we started writing songs together actually at one point, and even have like a little like 2-man project that we were doing, and have released a few things, just the two of us. And then Pete was played drums for the Offspring for about 14 years, and he also played for Saves the Day, and he's been a long time veteran drummer. He's incredible. He's one of the greatest drummers I've ever played with. He's so solid. And it's really incredible to play with him, because he's just, we barely had a chance to practice before before Pumpkin Drop like last week, and it was just like didn't miss a beat. He was so on it. So it's a band of really pro guys, and I'm by far the least talented out of the group, but I work really hard, and I'm a hard worker, so that's what I have going for me.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, dude. Where can everybody reach out and talk to you or communicate with you? What's the best way if you put it out there?
Yeah, I mean, the Defiant official on Instagram, a lot of us are active on there, especially me, because I'm the youngest. I'm the young guy in the band, so I'm definitely the spend the most time on my phone. And then I have Joey Briggs Music, which is also an Instagram that that's my personal Instagram that I respond to everything on that. So
perfect. Well, I appreciate your time, buddy.
Yeah, man, this is great. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir, buddy. All right. Disruptors out.